So hello again and welcome to yet another episode of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast series. And today I'm talking with Maria Wheatley about earth energies, megaliths, dowsing, all kinds of good stuff. I had a great time, really enjoyed it. First time I'd spoken to Maria, but I hope to speak to her again. And I learned quite a bit, as I hope you do too. And I hope that you find this interesting. Please do. Remember to subscribe to the channel, like and share the video. Here's Maria, thank you. So Maria, thank you for joining us. As usual, I'll start out by asking, how did you get interested in megaliths and earth energies and all of that good stuff in the first place?
Well, through my late father, he was considered a master dowser. And so from a very young age, I was dowsing and visiting sites all across the world, from America to Stonehenge, obviously, and to many other sites besides. And I also studied a lot of other disciplines as well. But my true passion is in with earth energies. And my father was very fortunate because he inherited all the unpublished surveys and manuscripts by another master dowser, well, two in fact. One was called Underwood and the other one Tom Lethbridge. So I've come with a legacy, and even in that legacy I'm still discovering new things to this date. So it's been a wonderful journey, taking me to ancient sites, and not just looking at lays either, but looking at many different types of earth energies that underpin sacred sites and cathedrals worldwide.
Yeah, I told you before that one of the things that I've discovered was there's a church in a place called Jindřichův Hradec here in Moravia, and it's got Templar artwork on the wall. And everybody thinks that there's lots of TV programs in the Czech Republic. You know, it's the secret to the buried Templar treasure. And I've had a go at looking at it and come up with the fact that actually it's pointing to solfeggio frequencies, 4 of them, and 2 of them I managed to decipher, 852 and I think it's 417. Hertz. And when you play them in that church, which is over a major vortex on what I call the Templar alignment, it's like electricity flowing through the air. Have you,
Yes.
You said you discovered sort of frequencies and things like that in relation to
Oh, yeah.
as well?
I've recorded all those sort of frequencies because in the UK as well, in fact, just down the road from Avery-Henge, the world's largest stone circles, you have a lot of Templar artwork and the Masons artwork as well, and encodements. But what I discovered recently, which is in my latest book, is that the geodetic system of earth energies, not lays, the lays are excluded from this, and so to some regard are earth currents. But when we look to the spiral patterns, the concentric circles, and what's called primary halos and geospirals, then they equate to musical harmonics. For example, Christians in their churches and cathedrals across medieval Europe, England included, they would use what's called the major third. Now, imagine that some earth energies equate to that, so that when you stand in a particular part of Stonehenge, you're within the major third. And the major third was used quite a lot, as I previously said, in churches, because it will raise your consciousness. But that's not the most strongest musical harmonics. So yes, I've recorded umpteen different types of Hertzian frequencies, but now it's musical harmonics. And musical harmonics can equate to maths as well. So for example, the major third is 5/4.
Interesting. I also, when I was looking at Slavic archaeology here, there's a place on the border with Austria where they've uncovered a large, what would have been a large Slavic settlement around about 800 to 1000. And it has some churches, just the foundations. And when I was dowsing there, these circular type churches didn't have lines going through them, but they seem to have earth energy, vortex or center inside the church. And when I dowsed them, the pattern of the vortex, like a flower pattern, actually, when you step back, the building, the inside of the building was architected in the shape of the pattern that I dowsed. Is that?
Yeah, I think what you're dowsing is what European master dowsers would call an earth chimney. It's a bit like a vortex, and it is like a flower. So I think that's what you're actually dowsing. You're just not using the terminology used across Europe. Do you see what I mean? That's for sure. Now, the interesting thing about the earth chimney, or the geo chimney as it's sometimes called, I know who discovered that. He is an immense master dowser. And what that really does is it brings the energy up from the ground, or sometimes it can go the other way around, a vortex that comes down from the sky and goes up. So I think that's what you're doing, and that has a lot of concentric circles, and it is like a flower. It's not necessarily one of the strongest types, but it certainly was used throughout medieval Europe, but not so much in the UK. We were using a different design canon over here, so that's very European, and I would bet money on it that that's what you've doused.
There's a funny archaeological site because there's actually within a very small area, there's like 10 churches or the ruins of 10 churches, and 8 of them are regular oblong shapes, and all of them lie on energy lines that go down the aisle. The biggest church, which is supposed to be the cathedral, actually has multiple lines coming in and forming an energy center just in front of where the altar was. And then these round ones, or figure of 8 shapes, actually, they have these like flower designs in them. So it's,
yeah,
wow.
Yeah, it is that is very common. But more than that, maybe something that you could look for again, just to enhance your dowsing awareness, is it's not just the line that courses down the axis either. It's either going to be a male or female current as well. And that describes its gender. So if it's like St. Vincent, it's going to be male. So what we have here is what you're seeing. I try to educate people to go beyond the lines.
That's amazing, because one of the things I've talked about in my blogging and in that book that I put together is, isn't it weird that when I'm tracking these lines and I ask, male, female, positive, negative, and they go through a church, other than like the Holy Trinity and the Sacred Heart, if it's a male line, it's a male saint dedication on the church, and if it's a female line, it's a female saint dedication on the church.
Go beyond the line but go beyond the line as well, because the real power lay systems, if you imagine you've got your line and then you have a male and female current entwine in it as well. So it looks like the symbol of the caduceus. I haven't seen that in your notes that you sent me. So I would say look for that. Additionally, in ancient Egypt, because I douse sites across Europe, I've done the Czech Republic, Italy. I mean, I've doused 17 different countries now. And what we can see with places like Egypt, they don't just have 2 earth currents entwined in them, they have 3, like at some centers in Bali as well, in Indonesia. So we have these amazing energies and more besides. So it's like when you look at the lines going through a church, when you look at the earth currents going through a church, that's just part of it. When we start to look even closer to earth currents and geodetic energies than that, we start to see that the windows and everything is aligned on things other than just the lines.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely trying to stay focused on these 90 pace wide lines. They come in pairs, male, female. I haven't found any third line.
Yeah, but you will. There's one that's called the neutral one, so you will find that, and you will find sometimes it can be 2 males to 1 female and the line as well.
I wonder if that's one. Never mind. I'm just trying to solve a problem for the last few weekends dowsing where I've got 1 line too many. I wonder if that's what's going on.
It is because that's not in most people's consciousness at the moment. Dowsers tend to only get what's in their consciousness and what they're aware of. Do you see what I mean? Now, when you kind of explore different things, you'll come across very exotic patterns as well. Very exotic patterns, and it's like the anatomy of Gaia. So it's like looking beyond one thing, and I would guarantee that's what you're probably getting, but you weren't necessarily aware of it, and you're trying to interpret it.
Yeah, what I've definitely discovered is that I started off dowsing just these small lines around the castle here in Brunner, and I definitely see lines like 5 to 8 meters wide, and then sort of 15 to 18 meters, and then 25 meters, and then 90. And there doesn't seem to be much in between, if anything. But until you've actually found a line or found one of these types of line or a specific energy, you're not aware it's there. It's like you tune into it the first time you find it, and then you find it all over the place. That's what I'm kind of finding, is I almost have to be tuned in. Until I tune into it, I'm not picking it up. And then after I've tuned into one, I can pick them up wherever they are.
Yeah, I think that's how you start off. But I think once there's about 49 different types of earth energy, for example, and I think once you begin to get to know them, then there's a relationship. I mean, what I found about male dowsers like my father, for example, going back to the 80s when there was very few women, then they would use dowsing to find things like lines going through churches. I don't do that. What I do in my work is I relate to the earth itself and the construct rather than just finding something. And I think that's more important. And I can take people, especially children, to sites and put them by, you know, a cleansing stone, for example, that has a lot of negative ions. I've done a lot of measurements on the electrostatic field, ions and Hertzian frequencies. Sensitive people just know where they are. They even stand right by them, and so do, you know, certain animals as well. They're very attracted to these types of energies.
Absolutely. I was stood in the middle of nowhere in the Czech countryside with my sticks dowsing away, and some old fella comes up to me, and we couldn't speak that well because my Czech isn't great, but he starts asking me what I'm doing, and I said, well, I'm dowsing zemní energie, earth energies. And he said to me, so just look where the cows congregate. You'll find it
that's
there.
That's called a geospiral. Where the cows congregate, that was known 80 years ago as the geospiral energy pattern. Now, the geospiral energy pattern is like Gaia can count in sevens. So the smallest is going to be 3.5, the next one 7, 14, 21, and so on. There's other spirals beside that, but that's what the cows are attracted to. They go to that. Now, what is causing that? It's not necessarily always earth energy. What's causing that spiral geospiral pattern is very, very deep water. It used to be called primary water. I recalled it yin water because it's generated chemically deep within inside of the earth, and it was military personnel that called it primary halo, and I thought because it's feminine water to call it yin. Now that comes out of the ground in a spiral pattern. That spiral pattern as well equates to the musical harmonic of the perfect fifth. Now, the perfect fifth mathematically is 3/2. And what does it do? In music, it allows ease of movement. So any line that goes through a geospiral, any earth current that goes through a geospiral is now far more ease of movement. Now, what Hamish Miller discovered going back into the 1980s in his Dowsing Odyssey of the Maria Michael currents, what he realized was it's the geospiral that is one of the most powerful forms of earth energy. Why? It causes the Mary current, or line as she's commonly called, but she's more like a river meandering around the line. It causes the Mary current to suddenly veer off in another direction. And it's intimately associated with particular phases of the moon, where it will be going in one direction and then switching the other direction as well. So creating like a gentle vortex energy. Its frequency in hertz is around 7 hertz, which brings your brain into that calm alpha mode. So musically, you can't hear it. But Kepler and Pythagoras, who discovered the music of the spheres, how the planets resonated with musical harmonics, Pythagoras is said to have heard them. Kepler said that it was the soul that could hear them. Now I've discovered that certain earth energies do that. I agree with Kepler. I think the soul can hear these earth energies, and it realigns us with who we are or to who we are going to become.
Yeah, Hamish Miller I am familiar with, and that was the book that got me going, actually, because then I discovered these two currents here in the Czech Republic, which I've called the Templar line because they go through all these Templar sites. I called the male one Perun, which is the Slavic goddess skies, and the female one Merkosh, which is the mother goddess in the Slavic pantheon. And I said about tracking from one end of the Czech Republic to the other, which I still haven't quite finished, but in the process I've discovered so many other lines and so many other amazing places.
That's what Hamish said in The Sun and the Serpent. He said, I'm only going to focus on the 3. I'm not going to focus on any others because you have emerging lines, which are called the alpha lines. You have converging ones that go into the ground, which are the omega line as well. So it's really, he focused just on that. But I had the good fortune to meet Hamish and douse with him. He forwarded one of my books on Avebury. So yeah, I've met all of these great masters who sadly are no longer with us, but his legacy lives on.
Yeah. So the one thing I've not been able to do, being situated over here, is, and when I left England when I was quite young. I went off to the US, so I've never really visited anywhere but Stonehenge, and that was, you know, pretty much of a disaster because it was in the last few years, and you can't really get there. So
Unless you have private access. You
yeah.
can have private access, and I take everybody by private access. I would not recommend the public access. And also, we've been lied to about Stonehenge. That's what I've included in my new book.
That's where I was going. I was watching I think a promo video, and you were talking about Stonehenge, and so I thought what I'd ask was, I really like the idea that these ancient people knew how to light up the landscape. I thought that was really a neat concept. Could you talk about that a little
Yes.
bit more? Because I think that's really relevant.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for taking the time to watch that. Yes, well, what's going on is I was working with a mathematician who is called Richard Cardrew and myself. So we're a bit of a team. He's very, very good at calculating diameters of pyramids and things like that. And I have that kind of intuitive know inside about earth energies. So what I realized, the difference about the henge at Stonehenge, for instance, is it's got the bank on the inside, created a huge barrier going around Stonehenge, with the estimated wall being between 6 and 10 feet high. Nobody was seeing what was going on the inside of Stonehenge. It was a secretive place, for instance. Now, chalk is very highly reflective, especially when it's polished. And the ancients polished a lot of stone. They really did. You're seeing the remnants and the vestiges of that which was. So if you imagine they're highly polished. Now, in my legacy archive I was talking to you about, well, I was going through it in lockdown, actually, because, we didn't really have much to do. And then suddenly I had all of these eyewitness accounts that were at excavations alongside the very famous Professor Richard Atkinson, who disagreed with him. And I thought, well, this is really interesting because it's controversial, and I like controversial ideas. And he said what he found in the dig at the Henge Monument, because we see it grassed over, all of it is just grass now, is on the inside, it was so smooth and cut integral to the land, meaning they cut out a kind of basin and a chalk bank like that, allegedly with antlers. Which I don't think that they were using. So it's all white now. Stonehenge phase 1 is all white. And in the moon, in a particular part of its phase, especially the night of the high moon, which occurs every 18.61 years, when the moon is that angle, it would sort of shone a beam of light down the white floor of the Stonehenge monument. So it would have been like being in a spotlight, a very gentle spotlight of white light, literally making the chalk be brighter. I went on as well to discover other ways that the ancients were lighting up the landscape, which is quite intriguing. I've taken a lot of measurements at Silbury Hill with a retired engineer, looking into its electrostatic field. Now, the electrostatic field above any height of 6 feet is going to start to change. That's nature. Nature will do that. And Silbury Hill, which is about a mile or so from Avebury Stone Circle, is the largest man-made mound in Europe. Originally, it was all chalk again, so we're going back to that reflective property of chalk, and it was smoothed off to make it into a mound, which was surrounded by a moat. That's how it used to be. Today, it's grassed over, and the moat is dry unless it's in bad rains that we've had recently to fill it up. And when the full moon, you want something charging the landscape up, then what would occur if you had some copper at the top, and it was built in the Chalcolithic era of the Copper Age and the Bronze Age, when we were importing from places like Cyprus and far, far beyond for malachite that you can make copper from. You have some of that on the summit, and then it would start to emit a kind of haze of a blue light. A friend of mine actually photographed that at the full moon, but the style of the photograph was a little bit unclear, and he didn't want me to use it. He didn't want to be associated with something so controversial, but he did see it. He said it was like a plasma event. Beneath Silbury Hill, you have a massive aquifer, which generates that geospiral energy pattern. You have the Mary current associated with the St. Michael Ley and the St. Michael current nearby. They don't go through it. And you have numerous springs, 81 springs, and numerous underground groundwater there, creating a matrix of ions. And so inside of Silbury Hill, it would be literally being able to pull up those ions, gamma radiation included, beta radiation, and start to draw that up has been calculated. So if we say all of the mounds in the very tall mounds in the Wessex area were chalk white, they were, another box ticked, then they too could have emitted this bluish haze that could have been seen for miles.
Well, of course, I mean, I intuitively think you're right, because if you go, there's obviously no electric light or anything, so it would be pitch black, natural light. So any kind of luminescence would stand out for miles, wouldn't it? I mean, it makes perfect sense. So when I heard you say that, I was thinking, gosh, I need to start looking. But unfortunately here, we don't really have any stone circles or mounds or anything. So what about other places in the UK where you found interesting earth energies, or just interesting in general? Because as I say, I've not really managed to visit many of them, if any. So I'm all ears, when it comes to those places. Maybe that we've covered in the book as well.
Okay, well, for example, one ceremonial landscape, because when we look at a stone circle or a mound, it's not isolated, it's a ceremonial landscape. For example, the Avebury ceremonial landscape, it goes up to 3 miles with numerous ancient sites in it, the same for Stonehenge. But if we go to a place called Oxfordshire, for example, and Swinside in Cumbria, which is the most complete stone circle in the British Isles, in England at least, then what we can see is a really dynamic form of earth energy. I think you're going to like this one, and I think you're going to go dowsing for it as well. There's in Oxfordshire, you have the Atherton White Horse. It's a chalk effigy in the landscape. It's quite close to a hillock, as it's called by the Victorians, called Dragon Hill, which has been sculptured flat. And most archaeologists agree with me now. They didn't years ago, but that has definitely been sculptured flat. Upon that hillock, Dragon Hill, there's two vortexes. Now, they don't have to match side by side. They could be like that or some distance apart. But if you have two vortexes and one is considered male and one is considered female, then what occurs, and it's an absolute wonder, is it generates its energy that comes together, and now it's a hermaphrodite line, because it's born of a male and female vortex. Now, when we decided to put long copper instruments to register what was going on, because it is like a cycle, it really is, with these particular types of vortex that give birth to these hermaphrodite lines, then what we discovered was it would come out 20 hertz, 40 hertz, 60 hertz, 100 hertz, then it would go back down. So it would go up quite some, then come back down. Then we tested another one, and it was exactly the same. Then we went to another ceremonial landscape and got the same results. These are all around hermaphrodite lines. Now, I think they're a little bit more important than the male and female that are separate. That represents separate, unless they come together, form nodes, etc. But these type of hermaphrodite energy lines, they bring more balance to us when we work with them. And I think they're the way forward. So at particular sites where you have male and female, the ancients were also looking to other sites. Where can we combine that? And they were doing that as well. And in some, it's quite rare, but in some churches as well.
What do you think? When I'm talking Slavic, that's 800. That's not that far back. But these Slavic sites are always on Celtic sites and Stone Age sites and so on here, and even here. What do you think they were doing with these energies? Because they're absolutely, I mean, they were far ahead of us in terms. We think that they were stupid, but actually they were just civilized in a different way, and they knew how to use this stuff, I think.
Oh, absolutely. The interesting thing about the date you've just mentioned, whether you're in the Czech Republic, 800 AD, but now I'm going to take you somewhere else. We're going around the globe here today. Right, I'm going to take you to Chaco Canyon. And Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, near Four Corners in America, it's the same time date that you've been discussing in the Czech Republic. What was going on there? They were building gigantic structures of a very unusual shape. Pueblo Bonito is like a D shape. If you imagine like a semicircle protractor shape, and they were building that around 800 to 1200 AD. So it wasn't just in parts of Europe. They were literally almost rebooting that system, is how I often describe it. Because when we looked at Chaco Canyon in America, they were integrating what's called a secondary halo, which is literally like a D shape, perfectly for Pueblo Bonito. So I think it was being like rebooted different parts of the world at particular intervals throughout time.
But I mean, what do you think they were actually using these energies for? Because I mean, Thomas Sheridan talks about the round towers in Ireland, and I guess there's a couple in Scotland, and he thinks that they well predate the Christian churches, that they well predate And he talks about accounts of how the crops would grow better around the round towers. So I suspect the round towers are also some form of architecture built on some kind of earth energy as well, because, you know.
They are. They tend to be geospires. But I've worked with Thomas Sheridan. We did Megalithic Odyssey together many years ago. But I'm going to play devil's advocate now, okay, and say you do not need that tower to enhance earth energy. In my book, The Secret History of Stonehenge, I did agricultural trials. Okay. Now, if you charge cedar, which was mentioned by John Burke in his book, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, many, many years ago, he put them at the center of stone circles. And I thought at the time, you're right, but for the wrong reason. What's at the center or the near center of all stone circles? It's the geospiral energy pattern that has a particular phase of changing. Now, if you put the seed in that energy field, I predicted that it would grow straighter and stronger. And it did. You see my trials. I've measured them, and I did that to very high standard. So you don't need that. All you need to know is where to find these energies. So I think, again, a bit like John Burke, right for the wrong reasons, but the ancients went further than that. Okay, you've got your tower. Okay, you've got your geospiral. The ancients knew where to plant. Okay, because when I was studying at Oxford, I realized that the ancients of the prehistoric time, in their farming traditions, had a template. What do I mean by that? It's like they had fields here and they had this here, and it was being repeated. So it wasn't like a farm was particular, unique to itself. It was following a template. So I decoded the earth energies going on there and realized that when they were cutting out into particular hillsides, for example, they were using an earth energy called an aquastant. Okay, which is very, very powerful. And again, that will cause the crop to go better. Now, here's the fact. Before the advent of fertilizers in the 1950s, especially nitrogen, which was commonly introduced after that time period, prior to that, the people of the medieval, us in the 1940s and 30s, could not beat the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age crop yields per acre. And that is an archaeological fact. It's because they knew where to plant. Some earth energies, like groundwater, can produce a toxic field. The Hertzian frequency that it emits is too strong. It will jar particular animals and particular plants. So you get stunted growth, for example. So they would avoid that. They would avoid those areas and grow in the areas that actually mattered to them in terms of earth energy that's going to increase the harvest. So I think they were charging their seeds up on geospirals, and they knew exactly where to plant and when to harvest. Now, according to the ancient Greeks who wrote about us, because the Romans wrote about us, because we are bardic people, in the Iron Age, the Greeks traded with us twice a year. We used to produce 2 harvests per year. Okay, the climate was a little bit better then because we were in a subboreal climatic phase, but still we were producing 2 harvests a year, and that's because they were using the template that I described.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one, when you start doing the dowsing and finding these lines and things, and then you start to realize that there's a relationship between the lines with architecture, with ancient sites, with churches. Even I discovered, I talk about some of the lines having like a personal connection. So one of the lines that I tracked, a 90 pacer, I knew it came into Brno, but I didn't know where. And I took my daughter to an exam at high school where she was trying to get in. And it was raining and I didn't know what to do. So I just got out and doused down the street and I found the line. I thought, oh, this is good. So the next day I went back and I tracked the line through the city centre. I was in tears because not only did it go to the school that she was wanting to go to and actually does go to now, but it went through the house where she was conceived, through the hospital, exact room where she was born, through the house we once lived. I mean, it was like, I call it the Denny Line. And I've also discovered the same thing with me, even though I've only been in Brno for 17 years. There are parts of the city that I've never returned to in 15. And yet I'll be following a small line back in the early days when I started dowsing. And it would be taking me to all these places that had significance in my life. And so for me, it became like not just chasing the lines. I'm a geologist, by the way, like Rory, so I like mapping things. So, mapping the lines is fun for me. It gets me out in the country. But then I started to realize not only does it take me to these amazingly special places that nobody really knows about, but it seems to have some personal connection to me. And I can't figure that out for life of me,
I think that is. Now, one thing Master Dowsers such as Tom Lethbridge and Tom Graves have pointed out as well, that is an occurrence on lines, is we can leave our own remnants trail behind. It's like a kind of ghostly outlay of where we have walked and where we have been interacting with. So when we go to certain lines, because you like your lines, then we can also leave a trail of our own self upon that. But I'd just like to go back to the energy line and how an agricultural scientist looked into growth on lines. Okay. Yeah. Now, he planted the mustard seed because it's quite fast grown. Again, it was part of my legacy archive. So he was planting mustard seeds and peas and various different produce on energy lines. And what he noticed in most plant forms, it was stunted growth. So that's why in the template, they were not using the lines. They were using the currents, and they were using things like the aquastats and the geospirals as part of their template. So if you're on a line, it can often give stunted growth. But it's really interesting to note that if we do have our remnants lines upon a line, so to speak, and the two unite, that's what occurs throughout that line. So you could be on one line and you could have been walking, and then you go to another part of that line. But if it's a global line, for example, and they're called primary lines, the main lines by older Dowsers that don't have their own terminology, then it goes round the world as well and comes back if they're a global line. So sometimes it's what's called our remnants lines that integrate with the line as well. The two are becoming one.
Interesting. Yeah, it's been quite a trip, actually, quite a journey. So this new book that you've got out, tell me all about that then, because we kind of touched on it, but we haven't really focused on what it's about and why it's relevant. And you told me in an email that you thought it was really quite an important contribution.
Oh, I think it is, especially to ancient civilizations and earth energies. I really take earth energies into a new phase. But let's go back to the people that built the monuments. In England, unlike ancient Egypt, we don't really know. I mean, we can say, oh, Ramesses was associated to Abu Simbel. We can say that about Karnak, and we can say, you know, Amarna is associated to Nefertiti and Akhenaten, for example. So I started to study through Dowsing initially, and then left that. Who built these ancient sites? And what I discovered in the Neolithic long barrows, and who laid out the ley system, if we're not using the natural platonic solids of the primary lines, then who's laid out the system, if indeed that's what we can call it. And what I discovered was there was three types of long-skulled people. I photographed them at Cambridge. I photographed them across the British Isles, actually. Their skulls extend that way, rather than the Paracas cone heads that go up sort of more vertical. And it was these people that were identifying the earth energies. Why? Because the Neolithic monuments are the oldest in the landscape, and they line up. And then the Bronze Age added to them. Then in 800 AD, they were added to again. So you've got like layers of an onion going on at these ancient sites. So I think the long-skulled people, they were the first to lay out. But when we look at the femur bones, and I've mentioned this time and again, when we look at the femur bone, they were only about sort of, the women were 4'9", and the males were about 5'4" tops. The femur bone doesn't lie. In the Bronze Age, they were much taller, like giants, compared to the smaller people of the long-skulled race. Now, their ears, our ears are here. You can't see mine or something like that, but my ears are here. With the long-skulled people, they were set further back, smaller, almost like pixie-like. And I think that's where the genesis of the fairy folk come from. It was from a kind of memory of these ancient people, because in the Tuatha De Danann, as I'm sure Thomas Sheridan would agree, they lost a war, the supernatural people, and they descended into the mounds. Well, what happened to the long-skulled people? They were all placed in the mounds. They literally descended into the mounds. Now, originally, I thought it was the much taller Bronze Age people that, because a lot of them were murdered, especially around Stonehenge. Okay, they showed wounds to the heads. So I produced my first book, The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge. Then I realized, after having more data, and more research, that they were doing the ancient Britons akin to what they were doing in ancient Egypt in that time. That's, they would put some of their serving folk in, or some of their relatives. So some had wounds to their head, but the primary burial was perfect, no wounds. So you had evidence that people were being placed in these mounds together. But towards the end of the Neolithic, that's when there was kind of a big fight for the spiritual capitals in the stone circle against the much bigger, more aggressive beaker culture, as we call it here, that migrated across Europe. So I look at the ancient civilizations as well as just the ancient sites, because I truly believe to understand the energies, to understand the beautiful architecture that they have left us, we need to remember the people that built them.
Yeah, I think that's always the. I was telling my daughter the other night, that's the problem with archaeology. They always assume it was a modern person or the modern mentality, and they don't ever try to understand what the mentality of the person 1,000 years ago might have been. It certainly wasn't the mentality of a modern person, I'm sure.
Well, no, because in the Neolithic, what we do know about these long-skulled people through the way they carved up the landscape is they were communal. It was our land. They didn't have large fence systems. They didn't have, this is my plot, that's your plot. That's how we think today. We think through what I own. This is mine. That wasn't the standard in the Neolithic. By the time of the Bronze Age, especially the mid-Bronze Age from 2500 to 1500 BC, then what was going on here is they were carving the land up with massive ranch boundaries. They normally mark earth currents going through the land or an aquistat going through the land. And that was saying, that's my kingdom, that's yours. So it was very, very different. So the Bronze Age are more closer in consciousness to us than the long-skulled Neolithic. In the long-skulled Neolithic time, they were making most of their ancient sites aligned to the moon's metonic cycle that occurs every 18.61 years. When it came to the Bronze Age, they started to widen avenues like at Stonehenge. So the heel stone would be in near alignment to the sun because they were a masculine solar society compared to the feminine-led lunar nighttime society at stone circles as well. So these were two different cultures that didn't see eye to eye. And it's been noticed by Professor Ian Barnes, for example, and Dr. Selina Scott, that by 2480 BC, give or take a few centuries either side to that number, the ancient British DNA of the Neolithic, that's the long-skulled people, as I would call them, and even Professor Alice Roberts is starting to agree with me. I've been saying this for nearly 10 years, okay, with books to prove it, that by, this time, there was no ancient DNA left. It was all Bronze Age coming across from Europe. So we know this race kind of disappeared. What was going on in 2500 BC? I've always said, a bit like the Spanish going to the Mexicans and the Mayan and Inca, etc., they probably brought disease with them, disease that was different to the natural people. Certainly there was a plague going on in around that time of the end of the Bronze Age as well. You have start to have mass burials and things going on. So we know there was a plague. And also there was the in-betweens. The great thing about the aDNA, that's ancient DNA test, they found, this is Professor Ian Barnes again, he found that these two cultures, they don't call them long-skulled and round-skulled, they were round-skulled and they were long-skulled. And this terminology will come out pretty soon following the publication of this book. I can assure you of this. Like I say, I know archaeologists in agreement with me. And you have these kind of two different cultures, two different people. And with the aDNA, it was discovered that they didn't interact. They didn't intermarry for 500 years. Then it's called by archaeology, there was a tipping point. And then there was intermarriage. So now we have the long skull, the round skull, and an in-between skull. Well, where were they put? Well, I started to look for this long-lost civilization and realized that in the Avebury environs, what normally happened with the burials of the long skulls, they went into long barrows, long skulls, long barrows. The round-headed, much taller beaker people built single interments of round barrows. The round skull went into the round barrows. The in-between skulls, that tipping point that Professor Barnes describes, I think I've located them, and they didn't go into either monument. It was like, who are these people? They went very deep into the ground, into long, like, if you imagine like a long shaft or a long pit, very, gracefully laid to bury, but then a flat grave on top, a bit like how we would be buried today. It's called a flat grave. So I think what I've contributed in the first couple of chapters of the book is about the long lost people that constructed the monuments and how the Beaker culture destroyed part of Stonehenge. They wanted to make it theirs. That's why you have various phases at Stonehenge, for sure. And I also go on in the book to say, well, what was Stonehenge used for?
Right.
I think, and I discuss that, as well as different types of earth energy that are found there. And if you take a blueprint of all the earth energies in the area, especially the meandering currents and vortexes and many other things. Let's have a blueprint, and I've got a blueprint in the book. We're just going to put that there. Now look at Stonehenge, the two match. And one of them came from my legacy archive, but it had a lot of remnants lines on. What I was describing to you earlier that the Master Dowser Tom Grave discovered, he often pointed out with particular surveys by dowsers, but that's a remnants line. We take the remnants lines out of his initial surveys, which is what I did, painstakingly so. Yeah, it makes it sound so easy. It took a long time. Then we're left with a blueprint. So, for example, there are lots of people that walk along a pathway and cause remnants line. People that walk lines causes remnants lines. And a lot of people think that's what adds to currents like Mary and the Michael currents, because people are walking them now and adding in their own remnants energy, if you will, to that.
Yeah, the Templar I liken to that Mary and Michael. It is, I guess you'd call it currents, and they cross in various locations. And when you put a line through where they cross, it's more or less a straight line, give or take a few kilometers either side. And those crossing sites are often have. Well, at first I thought it was all Templar, but then I discovered that it was in fact a family in Yindikru Radets called the Lords of Radets. Seem to be connected to all of these sites, bizarrely, even no matter where they were in the Czech Republic. So that's been what I've been up to, and I got distracted by all these other lines simply because sometimes the weather's not so nice, and I don't want to drive 100 kilometers to spend 2 hours in the cold, so I just go locally and see what I can find. But
absolutely, sorry.
Sorry, what I love about it, and I'm a complete enthusiast, is I have gone 6 kilometers from where I live, following one of these major lines, and found things that I've lived here for 17 years. I didn't even know it was there, like a castle or a ruined castle or a hill fort from the Celtic period. And the line will cross over the, you know, and it's like, wow, there's all these people going to Spain and Italy and Egypt for the holidays, and just 6 kilometers down the road is paradise.
Absolutely. I mean, here, for example, I mean, it was Hamish that noticed that the beautifully meandering current, it goes weaving like this, like S-shape. That marked the Michael current, but the line that goes through Avebury just marks two things. So the line marks the obelisk stone, and it will mark the long stones. But in the ceremonial landscape of Avebury with Hamish's work, the two earth currents weave their way out, and they kind of come down and then they weave like this, but the line just hits 2 points that go through. So I think by following the currents that entwine the line, and they're like rivers of meandering, they meander all over the place, then you find even more than
well, but that's what I am following. I'm following the currents. We're just do two different terminologies. I call them lines, not currents, and I call what you call a line the alignment. So I'm following the currents, and I must tell you, I was at this Slavic archaeological site, and I was meditating inside one of these rotunda churches, and I suddenly had this presence of an old guy dressed in like not much. And I talked to him, and after a long time figured out his name was Vuk Vzduk. Now that's a Slavonic word, which is why I had a hard time figuring out what he was trying to tell me, and actually means wolf's breath, or the breath of the wolf, or something like that in English, right? And so I asked this presence or this character, you know, why is everything here built on these currents, lines, whatever you want to call them? And he says, the rivers of light. And that's what the Slavs called these things, apparently, rivers of light.
Well, that's what Dr. John Dee did here as well. And he was including the Czech Republic because, as you probably know, he spent some time working for Rudolf II.
Yeah.
So he said in one of his books, he called the lines the alignment, as you say, the immortal lines and the beams. But he went on to say they give them both power in their word and in their works. And talking of wolf, I've got a tour coming up. It's on my website the last week in August, where when I was in Chaco Canyon, which I described earlier, it was built from the 8th century. It is fantastic. It's the ancestors of the Hopi who were not nomadic. They built this structure with 650 rooms in and 36 circular sacred structures that they call kivas or tuzions. And what I discovered there was 2 currents, probably 3, because I think it goes beyond 2. It's just Hamish focused on 2, and other authors tend to focus on 2 currents, lines as you call them. Then what we've got at Chaco Canyon is these amazing currents that dictate the architecture within the site. And I knew that they weren't male or female. They were more totem animals, because that's how the Hopi, the Anasazi would relate to the land, not like a Western person like me relating to Mary, Michael, and other things besides. Yeah. So I called one Wolf, which does tend to be sort of more slightly masculine, but still very family orientated, and the other one Deer, because they tend to be like polar opposites, like Mary and Michael, male and female. So I chose Wolf and Deer, and then I started researching what does Chaco mean, and it means hunting ground. So it was very appropriately, a bit like your journey. Suddenly words pop up and things pop up, and then you go, that's why. And it's like, the universe giving some kind of confirmation. So I should be doing a tour there as well. But what I always say to people is, even if you don't know about earth energies, if you don't need to douse at an ancient site. Just calm oneself down, so to speak, through slight breathing or just sitting down. In a warm day. It's very cold here in England, so I'm not going to be doing that, although I do have a tour at Avebury tomorrow. And let your body just kind of feel around, move your body. You're standing in the same position and towards really powerful earth energies, especially the GEOS spiral that always marks the esoteric center of churches and stone circles. Your body might be drawn slightly towards the land, or it may go to one side. And that's a way that we can relate to earth energies for those that don't dowse. Now, because sometimes I think, for me, dowsing is fine, but now I know so many different earth energies. I try to teach people different ways of relating to ancient sites, especially in Egypt, where they frown upon dowsing. So you have to do something a little bit different, because it's a different cultural, spiritual background. Yeah. And so we can relate to these. And even in my garden, I mean, I've got a modest garden here in Wessex, and there's a female earth current there. So a female earth current, for example, is very good at calming down and relaxing. And so I would do my own architecture in my garden associated with that earth current. Whereas some male currents, I'm not talking about the really wide ones, I'm talking ones about 2 to 4 feet. Yeah. They're not that big, but they interlace the planet. Then the male ones can be more of a slightly energizing quality, as what I discovered when I was dowsing with Hamish Miller, for example, back in the 80s, a long time ago. I was dowsing with him. So we can relate to these energies. And if we do find a GEOS spiral in the area, like you said, I have proved that if you place seeds on it, you don't need a big tower. You don't need a tower of power. Place the seeds upon this, and it will grow twice as straight, really straight, and much, much faster. Not only did I do that in an agricultural experiment, I thought, okay, it was a really hot summer in England a few years ago. I think it was 2020, just after the lockdown, or 2021. And I thought, what if I withdraw water from my samples of my control and my charged one? So I just withdrew water. I didn't water, and they were all given the same amount of water. Withdrew it. The control sample wilted faster than the one that had been charged. It gives it a longer way of growing. Its growth essence is stronger. And if we know where to plant, you don't need lunar law. You don't need anything. You just do what the ancients did. Find those aquastats. Find different types of earth energy and plant therein. And I've measured them, how big they were. It's quite astonishing. And we can eat healthy because it's literally being blessed by Gaia herself.
Right. The fact that people can detect this stuff anyway, because I've seen numerous examples here. For example, to my utter surprise and amazement, some kilometers north of Brno, I discovered with a friend a stone circle. And of course, it's a modern stone circle. It's been put there, erected in the last 10 years. But it was a bit of a puzzle because it actually lay on the crossing of two of these major male-female currents. So we were like, well, how did they know to put this here? And the next time we visited, there were three ladies there spending some time. And we kind of left them alone. But then as we approached the circle and they were leaving, we got talking. And it turned out that it was the husband of one of the ladies that had built this stone circle. So I said immediately, translated through my friend, why here? Why this spot? And the lady says, oh, he just liked this spot. He always spent time here meditating and contemplating nature. He just liked this spot. And I was like, wow, he just intuitively knew, there was something going on there.
And that's right, and the opposite as well. So when we look to the ancients, whether it was their sacred sites or their farming template, as I demonstrate, they knew where not to be. As well. So when it comes to habitation spirals, which is what the Masons especially were looking for, the Templars were looking for that. They flow through the land and then they spiral and they flow on. They're called branch spirals or habitation spirals. They again will give you a longer life if you live above these. It's because of the Hertzian frequencies that they're emitting, and also the musical harmonics. So it's about different types of dwellings as well, because the Masons, they weren't just responsible for grand architecture, they also were responsible in the UK for barns, town halls, stately homes, all of that sort as well. And that's where they integrated the more kind of exotic types of earth energy. And when it was looked to bodies placed within these habitation spirals in the Bronze Age burials that were occasionally put above them, normally it was to live above, because it was not just about sacred sites, it was about everyday living, growing crops, everything was down to the earth, that it was found that the teeth were perfectly preserved, more so than normal, and even strands of hair and strands of fabric. Now, in a chalk environment that absorbs water, that's unprecedented, okay, to have that type of... So for me, it's not just about the ancient structures they left behind, it's about the people, and it's also about how they were living and how they were farming. And okay, if they were doing that well, which they were, then we can do the same as well.
Well, just a last humorous comment is that I'm 64 next month, and people that know me tell me I'm getting younger, and I tell them it's the dowsing. Getting out there.
I would say I would add to that, as being a dowser for most of her life. It's Mother Earth. It's her energies, and once you reconnect to that, it's a good, blessed thing. So bless Mother Earth and bless Gaia.
Oh, I definitely these days follow the goddess. I have a particular Slavic goddess that I feel very close to and honor all the time. You will probably be amazed. It's Marana, who is the goddess of winter and death. But I found that she is, I guess you would expect it. I've found her to be like the gateway to the subconscious, or the gateway to the darkness within everyone, So she's really a very useful goddess, in my opinion.
Yeah, the crone aspect of the triple goddess. What's not to like?
Exactly. Anyway, tell us about the book in terms of what it's called, where people can buy it, and also how they can find more information about you and your activities, please.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Yes, you can go to the Avebury experience.co.uk and discover all of my practical courses, my shop. I have all of my books. I've got a really good The Essential Dowsing Guide that's described as a timeless classic written by my late father. I've got a more advanced dowsing book that tells you all about these exotic energies called Divining Ancient Sites. And also I do Astrology Past Life book published by Dolores Cannon. That's all at the aveburyexperience.co.uk. My teaching platform for all of my courses to do with dowsing earth energies and other things beside is esotericcollege.com. My college is fully affiliated with the Association of Distant Learning Colleges, so I can take all of courses to diploma level, which is optional.
Super. And thanks a lot for joining me today. I've really enjoyed it.